Because at the end of the day, really as a leader, what you need is followership. And you're only going to have people follow you if they trust you and you have a connection with them.
All right, welcome back to the Witz Podcast. Once again, as usual, we have a wicked awesome guest today, Mr. Jordan Berman. Jordan is the Vice President of Global Corporate Affairs, Business Transformation, and Strategic Planning for a global pharmaceutical company called Apotex. You have an MBA from Kellogg's. You're currently lecturing and speaking and doing a number of sessions at Schulich Biz. You have flown around the world dealing with things like trust and communication. You've worked with thousands of leaders when it comes down to things like leadership skills, driving culture, and we're here to talk about not only your book, but what we need to do as leaders today to build trust, to build community, to build connection, and the specifics of the Trust Trifecta. So Jordan, welcome to the show. Really excited to have you.
Great. Thanks for having me, Greg.
You've just finished this book called The Trust Trifecta. Very cool. As mentioned, I'm sort of well into it, and I love what I'm reading so far, and it aligns with everything that we do. And as you know, our company is all about making humans better humans, and you reached out, and we're here. So welcome to the show, man.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. All right. So Jordan, let's talk. Where do you want to start? Well, you want to give us a little bit of an overview of the book? Maybe we could start with that. Tell us what the Trust Trifecta is all about. Why did you write it? Let's start
sure.
there.
Well, I wrote it because, having worked for the past 30 years and coached and worked with hundreds of leaders, I saw an opportunity to kind of reinforce some of the lessons I've learned to help other leaders. And when I say leaders, and Greg, you would appreciate this, I don't necessarily mean CEOs. It could be a people leader, a manager. It's just somebody who leads other people. It could be a team of one or it could be a team of 100,000. And really, the Trust Trifecta is an approach to communicating a specific way in order to build a connection. Because at the end of the day, really as a leader, what you need is followership. And you're only going to have people follow you if they trust you and you have a connection with them.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, this is a big word, right? I think a big word I'm hearing, at least in the industry, is things like trust and transparency. Another big word is authenticity, right? So everyone's screaming this, and I think where this stuff gets lost is, the intention of learning more about things like trust and thinking about things or being more conscious in how I show up as a leader. The intention is there. But, how many people actually do this well? I mean, you've been around all sorts of leaders. The one thing that leadership needs, in fact, we could argue the most important thing is to have that connection and trust. And the majority of them fuck it up. So, I mean, why? Why is it so hard for us to build trust with people?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's a complex one. There are lots of reasons. And if you look at the three principles of the Trust Trifecta, consistency, transparency, and authenticity, there are challenges in each of those areas that leaders have when they communicate. And a lot of it has to do with vulnerability, for sure, and the willingness to be vulnerable. People show up at work and they think they have to have their work self and they can't bring any of their personal self to work.
Do you still see that? I'm often in rooms with people talking about the importance of or talking about the point there's no separation between home and work anymore. Specifically since this pandemic has hit, right? I mean, now we're literally working out of our houses, right? But you still find that happens in sort of big corporate?
I do, yeah. I've worked in multinational corporations. I've worked at small privately held companies. I've worked in not-for-profits and consulting sectors. It doesn't matter the setting. Big or small, publicly traded or privately held. I've seen it with all leaders who are new to role, leaders who are veterans in role, leaders who are male, female, from different cultures. I've worked with about 10 or 12 different CEOs alone in the past 10 years. And so I do still see it. I'll tell you a story about one a few years ago. And this individual was smart, capable, credible, had credentials. And she showed up at the company that she was joining, which was ours, from another affiliate. So this was a global company. And she had about 2 minutes to introduce herself. And before she introduced herself, the current president introduced her and said all great things about why she was qualified and she was going to help take us to the next level. And then she got up and she spoke, and I look forward to working with all of you. And literally, Greg, she was up there for 2 minutes, and within 30 seconds after she stepped away from the podium, I heard a few feet back from me somebody whisper and say, I don't trust her. Now you have to ask yourself, this person is a complete stranger talking to a few hundred people. Nobody knows her. Why does somebody say that?
Yeah,
and it's because it's a feeling. It's a feeling. Trust is a feeling.
Yeah.
And it's visceral. And we're all human by nature, and we're all emotional. And so when you look at trust, you have to look at how do you make people feel? Well, people trust you when they feel they know you. People trust you when they feel you're being straight with them. So that's the authenticity. They feel they know you.
Right.
When you're being straight with them, that's the transparency. And people feel you, they trust you rather when you're consistent. Because if you say one thing and do another thing, that erodes your trust. And that's why those are the principles, if you will, of the trifecta. And for those of you who are not horse racing enthusiasts, and I'm not, the trifecta is a bet in horse racing. And the bettor has to choose the first, second, and third place horse in that row in order to hit the trifecta, which is the huge jackpot.
Right.
And similar, an analogy to the trifecta is that consistency, transparency, and authenticity also have their role or position, so to speak, with authenticity being the most coveted. Meaning,
so is there an order to
is.
this?
So
talk to us
it's
about
the
order.
most coveted.
Okay, so one is authenticity.
One is authenticity. It's the most coveted. And the reason it's the most coveted is because you actually could have people that you've met, and I'm sure you have, and I have met people who maybe haven't been consistent, maybe haven't been transparent, but they're so genuine that you trust them. You honestly feel a connection to them. And so you trust them. So that's why it carries the most weight.
So how do you define authenticity? Because you use the word there, which is descriptive. But, if someone says, how do I be authentic? What would you say?
Yeah. A big part of that is around what I said about vulnerability. And there are courses now. I mean, you can learn authentic leadership, right? Schulich, where I teach, they're having a course this year on authentic leadership. Harvard's taught one for the past few years. I don't know what their curriculum is, but a lot of it's about your behaviors for sure. And part of that, I think, is about vulnerability. I think that you have to show a little bit of your personal self to make a connection to someone.
Right.
This same person who I'm talking about, who got up on that podium, I ended up working with her closely for about 1.5 years, and she didn't last long. It didn't work out. And I can tell you, I like to kibitz when I sit down with someone before we get to business, and I would come in, I'd say, how was your weekend? What's going on? How are your kids? And she would never give up an inch. And I wasn't asking personal information. I wasn't asking, like, can you tell me what's in your bank account? What kind of car do you drive or whatever? How was your weekend? Where did you go? What did you do? She wouldn't give up a thing. Nothing. And so that's hard to build a connection with someone when they're that guarded, when they're that closed-knit, and polished and articulate, but just too polished and articulate, not relaxed and just being themselves.
We might say that this individual is a product of their environment, their nurturance, how they were raised, right?
Very much so.
And I think this has a lot. And I was going to ask you earlier, do you find that there's a generational divide, or that you see this differently with generations? Let's just go say, like, maybe the older boomer to silent generation has more difficulty trusting versus the X versus the millennial versus the Z versus the A versus, right? I don't want to make this a generational conversation, but
no, it's a great point. What I would say, let me get back to your social conditioning comment though, about the way you brought up, because that's one of the things I talk about in the book. And social conditioning does play a big factor in this. And that's because if you're brought up in a household, let's say, that's very strict, and you are expected to talk a certain way and not talk about certain things, that is absolutely going to shape your communication style when you grow up.
Sure.
And so if you're one of those people, that background, that baggage, that comes with you. So I just want to circle back because I think you're spot on. That's a great point.
Right.
As far as have I seen any difference, I would say yes. On just the trust spectrum, what I would say is, younger people these days pick up more easily and are more sensitized maybe to the fact that they don't trust someone. Whereas people who are older, it just doesn't bother them as much.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that I think it doesn't infect them. I just don't think it impacts them the way it does younger people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you were talking about sort of, people having difficulty being vulnerable, and social media is a complete contradiction to, in some cases, vulnerability, and authenticity and transparency, because everyone's trying to put it on. You use the example of people would come into the office and they put their sort of work mask on, and they would sort of, be like, all right, well, here's Greg all day, and, nothing's getting through the shield,
right? I'm very formal.
Right. And in some cases, we're living in this world which people are selling vulnerability courses. Brene Brown is amazing. I'm sure you know of her, right?
Yes, I do.
I think the whole audience knows of who she is, but she's fantastic and talks a lot about vulnerability. So let's go back to, authenticity requires vulnerability, requires you to let the mask down, right?
And it requires you to understand what are some of the challenges. So you touched on one about social conditioning. You also have to think about things like gender. Right? Like when men and women communicate differently. That's just the fact of it. It's not good or bad. It's just the fact of it. And in fact, what I would say is in general, and this is generalization, that women are more thoughtful when they communicate. They're more interested in probing and understanding context and what's behind something. And men are sometimes in non-workplace situations, which is they want to drive to action. So what's the problem? So, if you're in a town hall in your organization, large or small, and someone puts up their hand and asks a question, if it's a male on stage, they're usually going to try to, give you an answer and probably try to problem solve something, give you a tactic. Whereas the female leader will be like, tell me more. Why do you feel that way? Or where did you learn that? Or how did you hear this? They're more interested in. So, you do have to be cognizant of gender when authenticity happens. And the other is cultural.
Yeah, I was going to go. Culture is probably huge.
It's huge, and I've had the good fortune of working in a few global organizations and working with colleagues in India and other parts of the world. And again, cultures are very different. Even our neighbors in the U.S., close by, we have very different styles. They're much more direct, less, Canadian and friendly and warm and all that. They're just cut to the chase. Tell me what it is.
So let's go on to what's next. Transparency after authenticity?
Transparency.
Okay. Famous question. What is transparency?
Yeah. Transparency is being honest. It's being truthful. What's interesting is last year, the nomination to be the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, she, upon her nomination, said this, and I don't have the quote exactly, but something like, when I'm the president, don't over-interpret what I tell you. Don't overanalyze it and don't overthink it. Just accept what I tell you. Just accept it at face value. The fact that a year ago, somebody in that kind of prominent role has to say that tells you that we have a transparency issue. Yes, we've got a trust issue on many different levels in society. We see it now through the pandemic with vaccines. People are not trusting.
Right.
But the notion of transparency is people struggle with it.
Yeah.
They struggle with it a lot. And they struggle with it for all kinds of reasons.
So what do you think are some of those reasons?
Well, in the workplace or in an organizational environment, here's what I've seen. They struggle with it because of a few reasons. One, a time crunch. They feel like they don't have the time to get into everything, so they just kind of give you a little bit, and that little bit isn't the whole story. So they're not being fully transparent. The challenge with that is that employees crave context. They're trying to make sense of stuff. They're counting on their leaders.
Human beings do.
Human beings. We're all trying to navigate this crazy world. And so we need context. And what happens, obviously, when decisions are made and choices are made, employees are often not part of that discussion. All they hear is the outcome, but they didn't hear about the debate, the arguments, the other sides of things. So that's one with transparency. The other challenge with transparency is the feeling that certain things are confidential, that they can't share certain information. And that actually is about more organization not trusting their employees.
Right.
So I was a consultant for many years, and I worked with organizations that didn't share any financials at all with their company.
Yep.
Well, if you're a leader of a country and you don't understand how you're performing relative to everything else, how are you supposed to do more of something, less of something, or something different?
Yeah.
Right?
What you're describing, just to jump in a little bit of, is something that's called emotional containment, right? And, the joke we make about change management is, change manages you, you don't manage it. And the people that have been sitting behind the scenes discussing the change and, planning for it and making the decisions and going back and forth, the only difference between them and everyone else is they just had a longer time or more time with the information.
That's right.
Right? And we know the human brain works like this. Emotional containment is provided by information. So I use this analogy all the time. You're on a plane and the pilot comes on and says, by the way, we're about to hit turbulence, right? What do? You don't blink an eye. You don't even think about it. Now you see the flight attendants scrambling to put the bar card away, right. The plane shaking up and down, they're strapping into a 5-point harness, and you're just watching a movie or reading your book or you're still on your laptop. Now what's the one thing that happened was the pilot got on and said, by the way, this is going to happen. And everyone went, okay, I trust the fact that we're not going to crash. I trust the fact that this is normal. But if the pilot didn't do that, if all of a sudden they just whack, turbulence hit and there was no announcement, people would panic. Right. They would absolutely panic. So I heard you say a lot around transparency, which is the importance of communicating early, making sure that you're providing, you use the word context, but just providing that brain, that survival brain information.
Right. And trusting that your employees are adults. I can tell you with absolute certainty, Greg, everywhere I've gone, on every survey of hundreds of thousands of employees, transparency has come up all the time as something that's a positive for that particular organization or a negative. People just want the truth. They can handle it. And what we often think is we're protecting them. They can't handle it. It's going to be too traumatic. I worked at an organization, to use your point about change, which is a great example. And this organization was going to go through a transformation. And in about 1.5 years' time, almost 2 years, they were going to have to make a major headcount reduction. Mm-hmm. What do you think they did about that? Mm-hmm. We actually started talking about it about 1.5 years out.
Right.
And we said, we don't have all the answers today. We don't know how many people. We don't know which people. We're going to try to redeploy people. Here are the good things we're doing through the change, but we want to tell you. And we kept talking about it. And guess what happened? Low single digits, if anybody, I'm not even sure anybody, but low single digits chose to leave on their own accord over that 2-year period. And every single person to a T on their exit interview said the following: thank you so much for being transparent from the beginning. It gave me a lot of time, 1.5 years, 2 years in some cases, to think about if I did leave here, what would I want to do next in my life, in my career? Right. They appreciated it.
You talk about choice. People had choice.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And the other thing, I'll just say, and I'd love to get your view on this, is there's a math to transparency. Mm-hmm. If you think about the transparency math, if you are not transparent, if you don't tell people the truth, what do you think happens? Well, I'll tell you. What happens is people start to get distracted. They know you're not giving them the truth. They start talking. Do you think when they start talking, are they going to be more productive or less productive? Yeah, are they going to be more focused or less focused? Is the water cooler talk going to increase or is it going to decrease? And then how much time are you then spending on addressing all these rumors than if you were just transparent up front and said, here's the deal with X?
Right.
It doesn't add up. You see it in corporations. Mm-hmm. High profile apologies that were only half apologies because they weren't transparent.
Right.
And so in the book, I talk about crises that were not managed well, from my opinion, from a communication standpoint.
So give me an example of that one.
Well, think about Facebook.
Okay.
I think lots of great things about Facebook. I think when the Cambridge Analytica scandal happened, they were late coming out with an apology. Yep. And it wasn't transparent enough. Mm-hmm. And the reason we know that is because there ended up being the Senate hearing, there ended up being an investigation. Yep. And we saw, I think, $23 billion wiped away in a single day from their value, all in that period of time. Mm-hmm. And we've seen it with other organizations.
Yeah. And we could also argue that the interview, like Zuckerberg, was evasive. Right, wasn't direct in some of the answers, wasn't as clear, and I watched a lot of it, and there's videos out now that you see like they've just cut them together, which it looks like a skit of just avoiding and deflecting and being evasive. So
well, look, and crises are a difficult time to maintain transparent communication. I've been involved in managing crises, so I get the challenge, but the challenge shouldn't still preclude us from rising above it.
Totally agree.
And getting out in front.
It's hard. I understand the world of crises and stuff, and even when my experience has been when a company's gone through financial crisis, and you've got the bank at the door, and you've got loans being called in, and you've got huge AP and stuff, and these are a couple of clients we've worked with, but the one key thing that navigated the financial crisis was early communication to everyone.
Right.
And that communication was sometimes like, hi, I'm saying, that we can't pay you. Right, but as long as we started there from the beginning, and they said, okay, well, what's next? Well, I'm doing this for the week or the month, or we're looking to take this thing. Let's follow up on this, and then to that day, and you follow, and you just walk the process.
Right.
Vendors work with you because they trust that you're going to get paid.
Because you're giving them the straight goods.
Right.
And it's interesting you say that because there's an example I use in the book that was from this year, just a few months ago, and it's a company called Gravity Payments.
Okay.
And the CEO is Dan Price. And what I loved about this, and this is in the section on transparency, is that like many organizations, Gravity Payments was struggling financially, and he either could close up shop or go bankrupt.
Right.
And instead, what he did was he had meetings with every single employee. I think there was 40 or 50 people in the company privately, and asked them what they would be willing to do and able to do around their salary for a short period of time to keep the company afloat.
Right.
Can you imagine how powerful that is?
Yep.
And so the company is afloat. Nobody lost their job. He didn't declare bankruptcy because he was transparent. And the reason I think people also hold back is because they don't have all the answers. And that's why I love your example, right? You don't have to have all the answers. You can say, this is what I know today.
Right. This is what I'm thinking of.
This
is
is
the
what I'm
decision we're going to
thinking.
make today. Right.
Exactly. And that's what he did. And so one of the benefits of transparency is that diversity of thought. He actually went out and engaged the employees in a very transparent way, saying, here's the challenge we're facing. Can you help me? And they came up with ideas. Now, can you imagine if all companies adopted that kind of?
It's hard, man. I just went through it. I maybe not did perfectly, but one thing that I do remember consistently was having that conversation with each and every with everyone about the bank account.
Right.
Here's how much money's coming in. Here's how long we can last. Here's worst case scenario. Here's what we have to do, and everyone rallied around and stuff. We're still sort of coming out of it.
And how much do you think they appreciated it?
I hope you guys did, right? But
I'm certain they did.
And to that point, I mean, I'm just sort of acknowledging the fact that it is difficult, because I think what we need as human beings is we need community. We need to be accepted. There's pressure as leaders, as much as, we need our teams, or we need action from our teams or tasks. We need their trust.
Exactly.
We need their belief. And sometimes in our own inability to be vulnerable, that fucks up. And that's what it's about. That's what you're talking about.
Well, and the other thing is, it's, think about it this way too. Greg, if you are more transparent, do you think you're going to have better alignment in your organization?
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
If people understand what they're doing and how their role contributes to the achievement of the team's objectives, the department or the functions or the companies, you're going to have better alignment. You're going to have better engaged employees, higher engaged employees. And we know that higher engaged employees deliver better financial results.
Yeah, I was just thinking something that we should drop the term meetings, like no more meetings. We should have transparency sessions with teams, right? Like, hey, what's going on? I'm really feeling fucked up right now, right? Or all the way to we're not just here to meet about tasks, we're here to just talk about where things are at.
Yeah.
Right? I think jump in.
I was going to say, I absolutely agree. I think more of just a sharing circle. I know that sounds whatever, but a friend of mine at his company, and he's at a large organization, much larger than mine, and he had this sharing circle when the pandemic first started, when people were really trying to get their heads around it back in March and April. And he said the senior leadership brought teams together and just started talking. Right. How are you feeling? I want to check in with you. And that means a lot to people. Yeah. We've seen it in our company too. It means a lot. That's what it is to be human.
Yeah, it's why therapy works.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
You go and you talk. So it says, tell me more.
Tell me more. Exactly.
You're like, man, I really trust this therapist. It's amazing. This stuff really works. So good. Okay. Authenticity number one. And it's hard to be authentic because we have this need to be liked. And we tend to put on this social mask, right? Where we want to be accepted. And I think that comes back to some of our primitive needs. So what I heard you say is like, if you're really going to be successful at the Trust Trifecta, you got to do these things in order, and you got to do them, you got to practice them.
You got to do them all. It doesn't have to be in order, but you really have to do all of them. And if you do all of them, if you communicate in all those three ways, you're set.
I think they should be in that order though.
Okay. Well, then you know what? I agree then.
Volume 2.
Volume 2.
Right,
Greg Witz, co-author.
Right. Authenticity. No, I just need what's that? Cameo?
The cameo.
Just
okay,
a small
fine.
part,
You can
right?
write the forward.
Cool. Hey, awesome. I'm good with the forward. So authenticity, transparency.
Yep.
Number 2. And then, which requires you to communicate early and, walk that line of confidentiality. I love your example of the math to transparency, the equation to all of this, right? And then consistency. So what messes consistency up?
What messes consistency up is really the lack of planning. to be honest with you. It's about being deliberate and intentional, because you and I are talking, you just told me the story that you had to, tell your employees something. Can you imagine if you went out 3 weeks later and you won a huge piece of business and then you said to everybody, I forget about what I told you a few weeks ago. We just landed this. Now you're all coming back. And then 2 weeks after that, something happened. And see, you have to think ahead. What are you going to say in the next few days, few weeks, few months, so that it's a more consistent, ongoing integrated narrative. You can't just sort of say one thing and do another is one thing, behave. You also can't say one thing and then change your story. And so your point that you made earlier about, not sticking yourself in a box is just use qualifying statements, right? What I can tell you this, what I know today based on this information is this, and it may change. It gives you some wiggle room, which you need, when things change. It's a very dynamic environment out there. So it's tough to be consistent. Yeah. But I think that the rigor and discipline is really what challenges people. It's really what challenges people. And the consistency of messaging, to be honest with you. Right? Like how many groups have you led?
Showing up.
The consistency of showing up. And how many groups have you led, right? Teams, leadership teams that go off site with Witz.
Right.
Have a great meeting. Do you ever close at the end by saying, our teams back then know we spent this day off. They're wondering, what are they doing? What are they planning? Did they ever talk about what are the messages we're going to take back into the organization? My experience is sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And when they don't, those people around that table sometimes take different messages back, because they've had a different interpretation of what's going on. So it's good to close the loop, summarize it,
tie
bring
it off.
some consistency, tie it off. Absolutely.
We talk a lot about this. We say, look, when we're training with you and coaching with you, this is Club Med. This is you're on vacation, right? You're waking up, you're doing the yoga on the beach, you're
the
eating,
cocktail
you
with
got
the fruit in it.
Right, it's good times, but it's when you leave the training, that's when the work begins.
Yes.
Right. So we try to sort of take that approach of coaching with them afterwards as well to keep that consistency.
Yeah.
But and you'll appreciate this. This is the biggest challenge in the training industry, right? People run off and they do these 2-day sessions and they go, yeah, you know what? I am a great leader.
Super motivated.
We had Jordan Berman come in here and talk to us about trust. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and demonstrate what I learned. Gets right back to the office and then falls short of those 3 things, doesn't remain consistent. There's that wonderful saying, which is, failure to plan is planning to fail. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And it requires a lot of planning. All of this requires planning. If you're going to, as a leader, look at your communication style. I mean, let's just talk about communications. It is a soft skill that is way underemphasized. It doesn't matter how many surveys it comes up with as one of the most sought after skills. As you know, it can be a career accelerator. It could be a career derailer. Doesn't matter how smart you are. Doesn't matter what you've accomplished. If you couldn't get up, for example, and deliver a presentation crisply, accurately, credibly, you're going to have a hard time moving up in an organization. But the thing is, I find leaders don't spend a lot of time on communication. And it's because we do it all the time. So it sort of takes second seat. And it's like every other skill. It requires a lot of self-reflection, a lot of self-awareness, a lot of feedback, a lot of rehearsing, a lot of practicing, skill development, taking courses. It's not a natural thing that comes to people.
No. I often say on day one when I'm doing particularly because it's what we do, communication, right? Yeah, we sell leadership and sales and all that stuff. And, just on the word, just back to the point of consistency so I don't lose us, just so I stay consistent, right? That's also for salespeople. I often talk about salespeople's the most successful salespeople are the ones that are diligent and consistent. Yeah. They do their thing every day. They just, they're like, they work their plan every day. They're just consistently, we could use the word grinding or chipping away or making those phone calls. But that's the difference between, the person that ends up at, a very senior level sales position, right? And the ones that don't.
Well, the other thing about consistency, as you're saying it though, Greg, is, I think it gets short shrift also because let's face it, it is not the sexiest topic, I'm Greg Witz and I'm consistent, right? It just doesn't. It's not even, it doesn't have the cachet even of authenticity or transparency. And so it's predictably predictable, as it should be. It's consistency. But if you think about it, people crave something that is predictable. They want something that they know is going to happen. They don't like uncertainty. People crave familiarity.
Yeah.
They like things that are familiar.
Sure.
That is something that is consistent. People like things that are clear. That's what consistency brings. They don't like confusion. So by communicating this way, you're actually making it easier for everyone, which as your leader you should be, but you're also, again, more deeply building those connections. And you need those connections if people are going to trust you. Yeah. Think about it. How much time do we spend at work? A lot of time.
Yeah, we say up to about 80% of our time is spent in our professional lives.
Right. That's a lot of time in your life. And as leaders, we ask a lot of people. We ask them to work long hours. We ask them to take on special projects that they may not be willing to and they may not be trained to. We ask them to move across the world and take on a 2-year secondment. We ask a lot of people. And I think you're going to get a better response if people trust you and you got a better relationship with them.
Right. Exactly what you said. People have never actually learned how to communicate. They've been raised by, the joke is, and Steve says this one, which is a naked ape hurling on a rock throughout space or on a rock hurling throughout space, right? That's who raised you. And all we did was just watch people communicate. And in a lot of cases, badly. They don't communicate their feelings well. They don't communicate emotions well. They don't communicate ideas well. They don't know how to ask for things. These are these interpersonal skills. And yes, some of us have spent time learning that. Some of us have had better modeling than others,
right?
Et cetera, et cetera. But I like what you said, which it is I'll just paraphrase, it's probably the most taken for granted. Yeah. Which we should double down on this stuff.
It is. And it's a time crunch. That's the problem. When you're a people leader, you've got a lot on your plate. You've got your own work. You've got to take care of your team. But carving out some time to be intentional and thinking about communications and your style and how you land on people, how you show up, as you say, that is time well spent. You will get it back in spades. Because again, the flip side is when you don't have that, as an organization, the cost is very high and very real. People don't talk about the concrete, tangible outcomes of a low trust culture. And I cite a ton of research in the book. There is research every year that shows concrete benefit. You have increased turnover, you have attrition, you have toxic cultures, you have all kinds of stuff that is taking energy and time and productivity and profitability away. So that's why it's not a soft skill. There is the hard truth about the soft skill.
Hits your bottom line for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And you asked me before about ages, and it was interesting because now I'm thinking about my parents, right? Yeah. So my parents, I'm a little older than you, I think, but
maybe a little bit.
Yeah, my parents' generation, like many of that generation, they did not grow up in a communicative household. People didn't talk. People were trying to survive. My parents' generation, my grandparents, they were trying to survive. There was no talking about feelings. They were
called the silent generation for a reason.
There you go, right? And so again, gets back to the social conditioning. You have to be cognizant of your upbringing and how it's impacted and shaped you, because then you're going to be bringing it to other people.
All right. I want to make sure I get to this question, because one question. We're living in a pandemic right now. So, what do you think leaders need to be doing? I mean, it's already November, man. We're in November, around the corner. The year's over. It feels like we sat down in March, everyone packed up for a couple of weeks waiting for things to sort of open up again. Yeah. I'll never forget that week where I reached out to some people. I said, hi, there's this whole pandemic, and just out of, being safe, let's push our meeting out 2 weeks. Anyway, we're now at the end of the year. We're moving into 2021, and there's two schools of thought. There's school of thought number one, which I hear more often than others, which is next year is going to be even more difficult. It's going to be more financially difficult. It's going to be even harder for us as leaders. It's going to be harder for people emotionally. The stress is going to continue, and that just compounds, and by the time you deal with it. What do you think leaders need to do the most next year to create trust, to succeed?
I think they got to stay close to their people. I think that's it. And what does staying close look like? It means checking in with people again, having these honest conversations outside of any formal one-to-one about how things are progressing. Just how you feeling, Greg? How are things at home? You need any support? Here are some workshops or webinars that might be useful. I think you got to stay close to your people. People talk about TLC. This is the time to really amplify that, to really dial that up.
Lean in.
That's the key. Lean in. Yeah. That's the key. And I do think it'll become more difficult. I agree with your take on that. I think with the winter ahead and the flu season and with, many organizations that have struggled financially, that is going to continue. And to your point, it is going to compound. And so we've got to really support our people.
Yeah. And I heard you say if you have strong trust in your company and with your people, you'll just get through this fine.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just be clear about with them what you know and don't know. And we had a discussion this morning as an executive team about, we have a date to return in our offices late January. We moved it out once. And then, we're trying to think now, when's the right time to revisit that? We want to give our employees enough time to prepare to come back or not come back, but we don't want to leave it too late either. Right? So just be upfront with people and say, this is what we know. This is what we're thinking. We'd love to hear from you. I also talk about communication. It's two ways. Like, let's talk. You and I are talking. Let's talk less about the didactic. I'm going to tell and you're going to listen. Yeah. I don't have the monopoly on wisdom. Tell me what you're thinking. Yeah. Challenge me. Give us ideas.
And that's what you talk about in your book a lot, which is the difference between the what and the how.
Yes.
Which is the how is more that behavior, and it's more this what you do and how you say it and how you communicate versus the direction that you're giving or the task that you're asking for.
Well, exactly, because in leaders, and you'll know this from your expertise in your business, is we place a lot of emphasis on leadership around the what. Right. People get promoted when we sit around the table and we talk about Greg. It's, Greg exceeded this and Greg award winning that and Greg that. But it's all about the what. Even when you look up a definition on Google, right? It's all about action words, setting a vision, mobilizing others, developing a strategy.
Yeah, I saw you listen to the book actually. As I was reading, I'm like, man, this is still what is defined as like successful leadership. Exactly. It's I've heard this being described as the square stuff. Yes. Versus the round stuff.
Right. That's I love that. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. And it's the round stuff. And look, increasingly companies for sure have started to change their thinking about the what and the how. But still, I was at organizations previous to the one I was at years ago, but not that long ago, where we had, underperformers, for example, that stayed on way beyond when they should have. And what does that come from? Somebody not having a transparent conversation come performance time.
Look, it's tough, man.
It's tough. Absolutely.
It's tough. Particularly if you're a nurturing personality, right? Where you battle with the whole not wanting to offend, to hurt, your feelings of guilt.
I've been guilty of it too. One of my biggest leadership failures gets back to a point you made earlier about wanting to be liked versus being respected. I was a young executive in my early 30s, and I was working at a company, and one of the accounts I was on was not going well. And the team that reported into me were basically my age, a little younger. And so we were more friends, and I didn't want to come down heavy. Where's that budget? Where's this project? And all that sort of thing. And it came back to bite me. And it came back to almost cost the organization the business. Now, it didn't, but that was a big aha for me. And thank God it came earlier in my career because I realized, I'm like anybody else. I'm a social person. I want to be liked, but I want to be respected, right? And what I also often say in workplaces is, you have to respect each other. You don't have to go out and have coffee and lunch every day. You don't have to be besties. It's nice to like the people you work with, but you got to trust them and respect them.
I might even say it's easier to like someone when you respect them.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Right?
I would agree with that.
If you don't respect them, then, there's that emotional thing that comes along with it. I just don't trust them. I just don't like them kind of thing.
And that's where the trust comes in, because it's also easier to trust somebody you like.
Right.
We buy stuff from people we trust.
Yeah, but there's science in this, right? It goes all the way to someone's face, right?
Yes.
Their eyes,
nonverbal
stuff, and how that lays into trust. So absolutely, man.
Look, Maya Angelou, she had this quote, which I love, and I'm not a huge reader, believe it or not, but she said, people will forget what you said, and people will forget what you did. They'll never forget how you made them feel.
Yes.
And that's what this is really about. That's what the Trust Trifecta is about. It's about making people feel connected to you so that they can trust you.
Yeah.
Because as a leader, there's no way you're going to be able to accomplish everything you need to do unless people trust you. Yeah. That's the only way they're going to follow you. That's the only way they're going to buy what you're telling them. It's no different than when we buy goods and services from a place. You go to your favorite store, you go there because you trust. That is also the key point, is trust has to be earned.
Right.
And we were talking off camera before that, the challenge that I've seen when people come into a people management role, not even the most senior person in the company, is that there is an inherent belief that trust is ascribed to them because they've come from somewhere else where they have a track record of success and they've done it before. So trust me, I've done this before.
Right.
Or trust is ascribed to them because of their position and their title. I'm the senior person, so you can trust me. has to be earned.
Right.
That's the whole thing.
Right.
And people forget it. And it's easy for people to forget, but you see it all the time.
Right. You know, we were talking about this off camera as well, which is the Charles Green's original trust equation.
Yes.
Right. Which says trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-orientation. And what you were just describing there was the reliability. Someone shows up, they might have the resume,
Right.
the credibility, the skill, the achievement, but I haven't had enough time experience with you, the reliability factor of you showing up here and doing it here.
Right.
So, yeah.
And those are completely interrelated also to the way you behave.
sure.
You know, I don't think you can believe somebody's credible if you don't believe they're truthful also,
Right.
which is the transparency.
Right.
You know, I don't think they could be credible if they're inconsistent.
Right.
That would harm their credibility. So they're completely interrelated. And I talk a lot about credibility and character and credentials in the book because to your point, I think, you know, there's some thinking and that, you know, if you have that equals this. But to your point, it's more complex than that.
No kidding.
It's more complex than that.
No kidding. So, like any good relationship, it takes time.
Yes.
Right? How we show up throughout that relationship is the definition of what the outcome is, which is trust, right? You talk about this. You had said it earlier. I talk a lot about it. Culture and trust is an outcome, not a step. Right?
Exactly.
You don't do this thing and then you get trust.
Right.
You don't do this thing and then you have a culture. It's the actions, the beliefs, the behaviors that give us this outcome of trust. And then there's things like what you were talking about, which I love your trust trifecta, which is these three things: authenticity, transparency, and consistency, and how each of those play into this equation of trust.
Right. It's not the outcome. You're spot on. It's the experience.
Right.
It's what kind of experience are you creating for the people you work with?
Right.
Are you creating an experience where they walk away feeling, you know what, Greg's got my back. He knows a little bit about me. I know a little bit about him.
Yeah.
There's a connection, or is it just Greg's my manager and he's given me this task and I'm going to do the task and at the end of the day I'm leaving and come back tomorrow, wash, rinse, repeat.
Yeah, I don't know how people do that. I personally cannot live that way.
I don't either.
For me, you talked about like you don't have to sort of like everyone you work with, and I was sitting here internally going, no, I do. I need to like you.
I also,
Right.
I believe you. I'm just saying, I don't think it's a prerequisite.
No.
I think it's ideal to, and I happen to be fortunate that I do like people I work with.
Right.
But you know, it's about creating an experience.
Right.
That's really what it is. And you know, what's interesting is, I'm sure you've met people in your life who have been, quote, wildly successful,
Yep.
you know, because of the money they've earned or the position they've held or whatever.
Right.
But what you sometimes don't know is what's the trail of tears they left behind them to get there. And for me, the hallmark of a great leader is somebody who leaves an organization and then other people follow that leader because they've had an unbelievable experience. They say, you know what? Greg is unbelievable. I trust that guy. He's smart. He's honest. He's credible. He's reliable. Pick all your adjectives. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to go there and grow the rest of my career with that person. I can't think of a stronger endorsement of someone than that.
Right. Right. Better than a reference.
Better than a reference. That's your reference.
There you go. Jordan, you are amazing. This was a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you coming in today. Tell us how we can find you.
You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can also find me on Twitter at Jordan_Berman. And of course, you can go to all your favorite booksellers to get either an e-copy or paperback.
Yeah. And Jordan is Jordan, Berman, Berman.
That's correct.
Awesome. And the book is called The Trust Trifecta.
That's it. Leader's Guide to Hitting the Trust Jackpot.
Amazing. Love the title. Loved our conversation. We're definitely going to have a part 2 in this.
For sure.
And appreciate it. Final words, anything you want to leave the audience with?
Go out and build trust.
Amazing. All right. If you like today's episode, don't forget to click that subscribe button. Don't forget to like, and don't forget to share and even add in a comment. And we will see you next time. Hey, I'm Greg Witz. Thanks so much for coming and checking out the video. If you like that video, you're going to love the next one. So I'd highly suggest that you click this video over here. And don't forget to subscribe and share.